Good morning and welcome to Rising Fridays. We have a great show for you today as always. It's a little bittersweet on Rising Fridays today because even though I'm so sad not to have the one and only Ryan here with me, my grief is in some ways trumped by my great excitement to have Katie Halper here in the studio instead. Katie, what do you think of rising at the desk? Is it a little different?
I feel like I have so much authority that I lack without the desk. So I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity.
It's a good feeling. It feels almost like we should, I feel like we should start implementing new rules, maybe new laws.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to issue any laws that you'd like me to issue from behind this desk.
Maybe something that would really piss off Ryan.
Yeah, what could it be?
No IPAs. Strict no IPA rule.
Yeah, or wavy hair rule. Yeah, that would kick him out, right?
I actually am entirely down to roll with that.
Yeah, let's do it. Then I'll have to show up in a wig. That would be great, Ryan.
You know, some commenters actually think that Ryan does regularly show up in a wig.
Yeah, his hair does get a lot of commentary.
But I think we can confirm here, Ryan does not wear a wig.
We're going to have to pull at it though next time.
Yeah.
This is pull at his hair to prove it.
People are going to do the Zapruder analysis of the Ryan Grimm hair.
Yeah.
Well, today
we don't objectify Ryan. He's very smart. We don't work with him just for his hair.
Well, it's important to clarify that because I think sometimes people do worry.
Yeah.
Right. Well, speaking of people with great hair, Matt Stoller's here today. Yeah. He's going to be with us talking about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan and actually, in general, the decline of the United States military and how monopolization is a huge part of that. Then Ken Klippenstein is here to discuss new reporting into how the FBI, you'll be shocked to learn, is expanding its watch list.
And comedian and writer Kate Willett will be here to discuss the long tradition of anti-work.
And before we get into that, we have some news that just came in last night. Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema has agreed to the Democrats' economic bill with some pretty key policy changes.
Sinema wanted to remove the carrier interest tax provision, protect advanced manufacturing, and boost our clean energy economy in the Senate's budget reconciliation legislation, subject to parliamentarians' review, all to which House Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said it was basically a done deal.
Right, and that parliamentarian I think we'll get into in just a second, but I liked this tweet from Hugh Hewitt who said on Twitter that Sinema could have demanded anything she wanted, anything that spent money or changed taxes, and with that leverage for Arizona, she chose to protect the carried interest exemption for investors. Not the A-10s, not the border, not the country, a tax break. Hugh Hewitt is, of course, a conservative. Katie, you mentioned the parliamentarian in your read just now. Subject to review by the parliamentarian. That may seem like silly, wonky, beltway language, but in fact, the parliamentarian's review of this will actually be a critical decision maker. She's a critical decision maker in what gets passed ultimately because they're trying to do this bill via reconciliation. And with reconciliation, everything pretty technically has to relate to the budget. That means its budgetary impacts have to outweigh its policy impacts or its non-budgetary impacts. What are you thinking as this heads to the desk of the Senate parliamentarian with Sinema's approval, with Manchin's approval, and with all of their demands in it? How does that go for Chuck Schumer, do you think, in the next week or so?
Well, I think either way, it's kind of a pathetic bill, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's rare the day that I agree with Hugh Hewitt. And of course, I don't want her doing the things that he wants her to be doing on the border or whatever kind of MAGA stuff he would like her to do. But I will agree that it's a pathetic thing to die on that hill, the hill of
carried interest, baby.
Yeah, carried interest, right? So, I mean, to be fair, she is representing her constituency, by which I mean hedge fund bros, right? I mean, she is delivering for them. But this is something, Joe Manchin wanted to close this loophole. Yeah. And when you're someone who, as Kyrsten Sinema does, makes Joe Manchin look like Karl Marx, that's a pretty good sign that you're a corporate shell.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's obviously, I feel like Sinema doesn't even try to run from that or hide from that anymore.
She's just auditioning to be a lobbyist.
It was interesting, though. I'm curious for your thoughts on this, how these negotiations were happening behind closed doors. We had, it still doesn't look like the White House was involved in it. These details were hammered out between Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin. Right. Knowing that they would ultimately probably need to sweeten the pot for Kyrsten Sinema, Schumer decided to just work with Manchin behind those closed doors. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Why do you think that is?
Maybe he thought that Manchin was going to be more difficult ultimately on a bill like this. This bill is and the majority of the bill, I think it's something like 85% of the spending in the bill, $369 billion, or what, I might even have that wrong, is climate related.
Right.
And so when they decided to give this the stamp of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's not an inflation bill. It is a climate bill. It is 100% a climate bill. You could maybe call it a climate infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
But obviously they're doing some stuff to the Affordable Care Act in it. But the Inflation Reduction Act, it's something of a misnomer. Most analysts believe the Wharton analysis that a lot of people have been citing is really interesting. It says it'll have basically a zero effect on inflation into the late 2020s. You could see a small actually increase based on their analysis over the next few years, and then a small decrease going into the late 2020s. Pretty much nobody thinks this is going to do jack for inflation in the short term, which is why I think even for bills, calling this the Inflation Reduction Act is particularly, I mean, Donald Trump wanted to call the tax cuts bill cuts. Do you
I like
that?
Yeah.
Cuts.
Sounds like Crazy Eddie kind of.
Right, but this is a version, like this is the very DC version of, like, we're just gonna call it the Inflation Reduction Act. It's mostly gonna be about climate, but hey.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they want to be associated with the IRA or something, but make it look like an exciting bomb of a bill, perhaps. Sorry to my Irish friends out there.
Are you sorry?
Some of my best friends are Irish
sorry.
American, for real, and you know who I'm talking about, my friends. Yeah. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's not even good for climate. The progressives are not happy with this bill.
Right.
When Joe Manchin gets to brag about how much drilling he's going to be able to do, all the permits that he's getting, when Exxon is celebrating it, again, that's a sign that this is not a victory for progressives at all, or for the climate, as we would frame it.
Well, and as you just
planet.
mentioned, Exxon, last week the CHIPS bill that passed was completely celebrated by Lockheed. And the media this week has been patting Joe Biden on the back. It's basically saying, he's back, baby. Like, here he is, passing just win after win. FDR, here he is. And you wanted to talk about a tweet, actually, kind of to this extent.
Right, yeah. Well, so some are noting this some are framing this as a legislative win for President Biden. Jordan Weissman tweeted, obviously it's not the second coming of FDR, but as of now, it looks like Biden's first term could be on par with Obama's when it comes to significant achievements and with a much smaller majority.
In terms of making Lockheed Martin happy?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's Obama-esque if what Obama did was sell out the American people. I mean, that's what it has in common, right? Like being good for Wall Street as opposed to Main Street. That we got that covered. It's basically the status quo dressed up as hope and change. Mm-hmm. So on that level, it is kind of like Obama.
Yeah, is that supposed to be a compliment?
I know, right? Yeah. Also all talk and no action.
Right, and by the way, the Obama era and through so many different lenses is what led directly to the populism of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump suddenly surging, and it's exactly because of what you were talking about. So saying that it's going to look like Obama's first term, which again sparked a revolt. Occupy Wall Street was Obama's first term. The Tea Party was Obama's first term, and you can get into dissecting the origins of both of those movements. But they were populist revolts induced by basically selling out to Wall Street time and again. Big congrats to Joe Biden for having an Obama-esque term. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about this in my radar, but I think, and I'm curious because you alluded to the progressive upset over this bill. Again, this is, how are they paying for all of the subsidies to the climate and green energy industry, which is a huge political benefactor of Democrats? Well, in ways that do technically raise taxes a little bit. Not a huge tax increase, but they do raise taxes across the board. They argue those will be paid for by subsidies for electric vehicles and in the Obamacare stuff that they do in it. But it's still just an amazing, in this moment of inflation. I was extremely infuriated, like a lot of people on the right were, when the Trump administration expended all of its political capital on a corporate tax cut. right?
Right.
And this to me almost feels like a version of Democrats doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I get, I wanted to actually quote someone who was a former Sinema staffer in case we needed some insight into what's motivating her and who's benefiting from this. But a former staffer wrote, "We can only assume that she's been motivated by the money they're donating to her campaigns." And of course, she raised more than $2.2 million from the securities and investment sector since 2017. And last year, she got more than $144,000 in donations from industry groups that lobbied against closing the carried interest loophole, according to Huffington Post. So this former staffer says, "We can only assume that she's been motivated by the money they're donating to her campaigns. I knew she was always trying to be an atypical Democrat. She wants to be Arizona's new maverick. I never thought she would just toe the party line by throwing away campaign promises you made and snubbing your nose at the people who got you elected. That makes you the opposite of a maverick. It makes you a corporate shill." And this is a former staffer. This isn't like Katie Halper saying that.
Or is it?
Or is it? Yes, they are. Well, they did stay anonymous because they still work in Democratic politics. But
you just pulled off the anonymous source of the century.
Did. Yes, I'm deep
read it. Yeah,
I read it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point. And the other thing I would say just is that in a really, the economy is always a fragile ecosystem, but when you have inflation at this level, that means it's and supply chain problems and a ground war in Europe, that means it's extremely fragile. And, as sympathetic as I am to making corporations, for instance, pay taxes, which the bill does do. This is maybe a moment where people need to rethink some of the things in this bill. Like, not everything here is going to go over very well for the economy in 2022, in fall, and being implemented in fall 2022, early 2023. We could be seeing something. A lot of economists are pretty happy with the bill and they're not worried about it, but they are messing with an especially fragile ecosystem right now.
Yeah, and it is also worth noting that closing this loophole is something that Obama promised to do, that Trump promised to do, and it's this loophole that led Warren Buffett to say that he pays higher rates and taxes than his secretary.
Yep.
So thank you, Kyrsten Sinema, and thank you, Joe Biden, for not even getting your party in line.
Love those loopholes.
Yeah, love the loopholes.
Just love them. All right. Well, more on this note when I go through my radar, and that will be up next.